A judge has rejected a request from Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes lost her final bid to stay out of prison.
Elizabeth Holmes must report to prison on May 30th.
It finally happened, folks. Elizabeth Holmes is now officially in jail. She's set to serve 11 years in a minimum security prison while somehow dating a rich guy and raising 2 kids. If that's not the American dream, I don't know what is. We're about to embark on a journey through the valley. Our tour guide, none other than Elizabeth Holmes, the woman with a voice deeper than the Mariana Trench and a knack for bamboozling billionaires.
And sorry, I should get into the deep voice thing
Because apparently she has dropped that ever since starting to rebuild her image. And folks, if you're new to this, we're going to get into all of it. In quick summary, she raised money from the likes of Rupert Murdoch, Betsy DeVos, and the Walton family, all while wearing a Steve Jobs-esque turtleneck and using a voice that sounded like Hulk Hogan doing a Kermit the Frog impression.
We've made it possible to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm.
But it turned out that what she was raising money on, her revolutionary blood testing gadget, Theranos, was about as real as my chances of becoming shortstop for the Toronto Blue Jays. Today, we're going to dive into this whole mess, which was ultimately a masterclass in groupthink, where everyone wants a piece of the pie and nobody wants to ask if the pie even exists. Spoiler alert, it didn't. There was never any peer-reviewed research on Theranos tech, which would be like buying a car without anyone ever actually taking the time to look under the hood.
Call it due diligence.
Let's dive in. Our protagonist, or should we say antagonist, is Elizabeth Holmes. Born in 1984 in Washington, D.C., she spent her formative years shuffling from the capital to Houston. She was, you could say, from a pedigree of high stakes and big dreams. With a father named Christian, who had his fingers in many pies, including the bankrupt Enron, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, USAID, among others, and a mother named Noelle Ann, who was a congressional committee staffer. High school for Holmes wasn't about homecoming queens and football games. It was the perfect breeding ground for developing her salesmanship. While some teenagers were flipping burgers or delivering papers, she was selling C++ compilers to Chinese universities. Because why not, right? Stanford was the next stop in her journey, where she dabbled in chemical engineering. But like many wannabe moguls in the early 2000s, Holmes decided that degrees were overrated and dropped out of school, turning her tuition money into seed funding for a consumer healthcare tech company. And just like that, her voice went all Louis Anderson, and she began donning the iconic black turtleneck. Now, all she needed was the billion-dollar idea to match the billion-dollar wardrobe. Little did the world know, it was already brewing. In 2002, Holmes had a light bulb moment while collecting blood samples for SARS testing at the Genome Institute in Singapore. This could have been inspired by anything, a prick of the needle, the slow collection process, or maybe she just hated the clinical smell. But one thing was certain, she wanted a medical testing system as integrated as her ambitions.
I believe the individual is the answer to the challenges of healthcare.
Upon her return to sunny California in 2003, Holmes had devised a wearable patch. Imagine a Fitbit that can also play doctor. It could test microscopic blood samples for diseases, adjust medication dosage according to variables in the patient's blood, and send updates to doctors as if it was updating its Facebook status. One part James Bond gadget, one part Star Trek tricoder, and voila, her first patent was filed. In no time, this brainchild blossomed into Theranos, a linguistic love child of therapy and diagnosis. The central claim, no more vials of blood for testing. A few drops would be enough to detect cholesterol and a range of other diseases, with the test reported to be completed in a matter of seconds. It even had a menu offering more than 240 tests, including celiac and cocaine. And the mechanism? A specially designed blood collection pen and the mini laboratory device known as Edison.
So there we go. And there it is. That's it. It was done. Quick and painless.
But what really baked their noodles was the star-studded board of directors Holmes assembled. Ever heard of Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State? How about the former U.S. Secretaries of Defense William Perry and James Mattis? And we can't forget the retired U.S. Navy Admiral Gary Rougehead and former Wells Fargo CEO Dick Kovacevic. The company's boardroom sounded more like a cabinet meeting, and these high-profile names lent the venture a veneer of credibility that was hard to ignore. So why did these powerful figures buy into Theranos' vision? Let's break it down. They saw a disruptive potential that could transform healthcare, a high-growth market with enormous profit margins, and they were also seduced by Holmes' charisma, as crazy as that sounds. plus the secrecy surrounding the technology and the glowing endorsements from influential figures.
It's reasonable to compare you, I usually don't do this, to Steve Jobs and what he did for computing. I regard you as a visionary, next generation person.
Let's cut to the chase. How did it unravel? Well, if it were up to Ian Gibbons, former chief scientist for Theranos and a tragic hero in the timeline, the bubble would have never happened. Gibbons was behind 23 patents at the company, but was increasingly frustrated that the technology, the backbone of Theranos, wasn't up to scratch. In 2006, he warned Holmes, "Our technology is not ready for public use. It's not accurate." But instead of heeding his warning, the higher-ups gave him the boot, enabling the fraud to continue. In 2013, Gibbons tragically took his own life after a legal battle over patent theft, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Now let's fast forward to Silicon Valley 2015. Theranos is on top of the world, or so it seems. Underneath, it's more like a scene from Jenga. All it takes is one wrong move and the whole tower comes crashing down. Cracks first began to appear under the surface in February when a Stanford professor wrote in the Journal of American Medical Association that no peer-reviewed research on the tech behind Edison had been published in medical research. Months later, to dispel rising concerns, Holmes went as far as to bring then Vice President Joe Biden to their facility, which later turned out to be a fake facility created specifically for the vice presidential tour. And then there was the arrival of whistleblowers in the building. Erica Chong and Tyler Schultz, former Theranos employees, played this role when their moral compasses pointed them straight to the Wall Street Journal. Almost overnight, Theranos went from a poster child of Silicon Valley innovation to a cautionary tale of deception and hubris. The FDA, following up with its own investigation, added fuel to the fire, and suddenly the scrutiny was too much to bear. Holmes, however, wasn't going down without a fight. In October 2015, she went on Mad Money and other media outlets claiming to be shocked by the allegations, playing the misunderstood genius card.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
But as she went on her damage control tour, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services released a damning report on Theranos Lab, forcing them to suspend operations at its wellness centers. And that's when the trouble really began. In 2017, the state of Arizona slapped Theranos with a lawsuit, accusing the company of peddling over 1 million blood tests to Arizonans while playing fast and loose with the facts about these tests. Theranos agreed to pay back the consumers and cough up $225,000 in civil fines and attorney fees. A total hit of $4.65 million. Not exactly pocket change, even for a once tech darling. That same year, about 99% of Theranos shareholders chose to take the blue pill, agreeing to put down their legal pitchforks in exchange for shares of preferred stock. Holmes in turn forfeited some of her equity to make sure the value dilution didn't hit non-participating shareholders. A year later, the SEC charged Holmes and Theranos' former president, Ramesh Balwani, with defrauding investors to the tune of more than $700 million while parading a product around that was about as real as unicorns. And what did Holmes do? She settled with the SEC, effectively exchanging her control over Theranos, her shares, and her right to be an executive in any public company for the next decade for a $500,000 fine. Even as Theranos crumbled under allegations of fraud, some backers stood by Holmes. Tim Draper, for example, doubled down on his defense of Holmes on CNBC, saying that she had created an amazing opportunity and was bullied into submission. But as the facts rolled in, the reality of the situation sank in. They had backed a losing horse. These titans of industry, drawn in by the allure of revolutionizing healthcare, had instead walked straight into one of the biggest scandals in tech history. So much for the golden touch, huh? Meanwhile, the company wasn't faring much better. By April 2018, 105 employees were given their walking papers, leaving Theranos running on a skeleton crew. The company was finally put out of its misery in September when it began formal dissolution. Enter the courtroom.
Were you and Sunny Balwani ever engaged in a romantic relationship?
Yes.
Did you ever tell investors that you had a romantic relationship?
No.
When the dust settled among government agencies, Holmes and Sunny Balwani, her ex-boyfriend and former Theranos chief operating officer, found themselves up against 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in June of 2018. Their defense? Well, let's say it's like trying to build a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Holmes took the stand, spinning a yarn of being misled by her staff about the technology and being under the undue influence of Balwani.
What?
It's not every day you get to play both the victim and the villain in the same story, but Holmes managed to walk that tightrope. After 7 days of this courtroom drama, the jury started deliberating. Were they buying what Holmes was selling? Well, the verdict, a mixed bag. On January 3rd, 2022, Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors, but not guilty on 4 counts of defrauding patients. Her sentence, 11 years and 3 months. She did, however, make out better than Balwani, who was found guilty on 10 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, resulting in a prison sentence of nearly 13 years. Collectively, the two were ordered to pay restitution of more than $452 million, for which they are jointly and severally liable. One might think that after such a fall from grace, Holmes would lay low. But oh no. Prosecutors allege she tried to abscond to Mexico, which her defense rebutted as just a holiday plan gone wrong. Holmes then appealed her conviction, claiming she was barred from referring to Balwani's testimony, a plea that fell on deaf ears in the court. So let's wrap it up. As we sail away from the wreckage of Theranos, there's a message in this bottle for Silicon Valley. When fake it till you make it gets a little too real, the bubbles in your champagne might quickly turn into an exploding soda can. A once billionaire CEO is now a jailbird, and all it took was a trail of over-embellished truths, a secretive medical device, and a throng of investors blinded by dollar signs. It's hard to know how Holmes thought this would play out. Perhaps she thought she could fool her patients. Perhaps she thought she could turn it into a Ponzi. Perhaps she thought that eventually she'd be able to figure out this tech. Perhaps it was always just about figuring out how to live another day. I don't know. If Elizabeth Holmes had a superpower, it wasn't disrupting healthcare. It was making people think they found their next golden goose. Triggering that part of her potential investors' brains that say, I'm gonna get rich. But when you invest in technology that's as thoroughly reviewed as a sketchy Yelp restaurant, you shouldn't be surprised when the souffle collapses. The cherry on top, when Holmes got caught for defrauding investors, not patients. What's the moral here? Screw with the money, you're toast, but risk the health of innocent patients, and it's just another Tuesday in the Valley. That's capitalism, folks, where investors are like children who have eaten too much candy and say, it wasn't me, I swear, the candy tricked me into eating it. Yet when the dental bill comes, they're the first to point fingers. Theranos was the train wreck we couldn't look away from. Elizabeth Holmes' story received a slew of documentaries and even a miniseries. I guess it's easier to focus on the dazzling conductor than question why the train is heading off the cliff. Today, Holmes is eating prison grub, and unless she gets out on early parole, she won't get out of jail until she's post-menopause. Bringing children into this world right before serving an 11-year prison sentence is exactly what a sociopath would do in this scenario. And guess what? Back in 2021, Holmes became a mother in light of the inevitable outcome. Her son's birth was followed by a second pregnancy announced just weeks before her sentencing hearing in 2022. Perfect timing, right? It's almost as if she planned it. But I digress. During her appeal in 2023, she lived on a rather plush estate, costing a cool $13,000 a month. Well, at least she'll be able to tell her kids she once lived the life of a Silicon Valley mogul. And I'm sure the tabloids will let us know how her life is after prison. As for investors like Rupert Murdoch, Betsy DeVos, and the Walton family, something tells me that they're going to be just fine. Like one of us going down to the local casino and dropping $20 on a slot machine. Just a slight hiccup in the grand scheme of their fortunes. If only we could be so resilient. And there you have it, folks, the tale of Theranos, a billion-dollar house of cards that fell faster than you can say the words due diligence. Let's remember the next time Silicon Valley starts crying for a bailout and acting like they're smarter than us, that this is the same crowd that rushed to invest in a pie and didn't even take the time to check to see if the pie existed, which is pretty much your only job as an investor. So here's to you, Silicon Valley, and the ridiculous stories of failure you're going to bring us in the future. Ones that only demonstrate gross negligence on your part, but you're still going to have the courage to blame anyone but yourselves. So guys, we just recently launched this channel and we noticed that 99.9% of our viewers are not subscribed. So if you enjoyed this video, we need your help in growing this channel. By subscribing, that would help us keep the lights on and make sure that our crews have jobs in these uncertain times. So please hit that subscribe button, and we promise to make more quality videos that I'm sure you're gonna love. All right, everybody, thank you for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments section. Do you think that Holmes got off easy with an 11-year term? Do you think that the investors should just be wearing this one? What's your thoughts on Silicon Valley? You think that they get a bad rap, or that we should be harder on them? All right, everybody, thanks for watching.